Now, the queen, believing that Snow White was dead, had no doubt that she was again the first and fairest woman in the world. So she walked up to the mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" And the mirror replied, "Queen, thou art the fairest here I hold, but Snow White over the 7 hills, who with the dwarfs now dwells, is fairer still 1,000-fold." The queen trembled, knowing the mirror always told the truth. She felt sure that the hunter had deceived her, and that Snow White was still alive. She thought and thought, late and early, early and late, how best to kill Snow White. For her jealous heart would give her no rest until she again was the fairest lady in all the land. At last the queen thought of a plan. She painted her face, dressed herself like an old peddler woman, and changed her appearance so much that no one could recognize her. In this disguise she went over the 7 hills until she came to the house of the 7 dwarfs. She knocked at the door and cried, "Fine wares for sale, fine wares for sale." Snow White looked out of the window and said, "Good morning, good woman. What have you to sell?" "Good wares, fine wares," answered the queen, "ribbons of all colors," and she drew out one that was woven of brightly colored silk. "I may surely let the honest woman in," thought Snow White. She said, "Unfasten the door," and bought herself some pretty ribbons. "Child," said the old woman, "what a sight you are! Let me lace your bodice properly." Snow White, fearing no harm, stepped in front of the old woman and allowed her to fasten her bodice with the new ribbon. But the old woman laced it so quickly and so tightly that it took Snow White's breath away, and she fell down as if dead. "Now I am the fairest at last," said the wicked queen to herself, and then she sped away. The 7 dwarfs came home soon after, and they were struck by horror to find this poor Snow White lying on the ground, as if she were dead. They lifted her up, and seeing that she was laced too tightly, they quickly cut the ribbon off of her bodice. Snow White began to breathe faintly and slowly returned to life. When the dwarfs heard all that had happened, they said, "The old peddler woman was none other than the wicked queen. You must be very careful, Snow White, and never again open the door if we are not home." As soon as the wicked queen returned to the castle, she went to her mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" And the mirror answered as usual, "Queen, thou art the fairest here I hold, but Snow White over the 7 hills, who with the 7 dwarfs now dwells, is fairer still 1,000-fold." When the queen heard this, she was so alarmed that all the blood rushed to her heart, for she knew at once Snow White was still alive. This time, she said to herself, "I will think of a plan that will make an end to her once and for all." With the help of witchcraft, in which she was very skillful, the queen made poisonous comb. Then she changed her face and clothes again, and took a form of a different sort of old woman. Again she crossed the 7 hills to the home of the 7 dwarfs, knocked at the door and called out, "Fine wares to sell." Snow White looked out of the window and said, "Go away, I cannot let anyone into the house." "But surely you are allowed just to look," answered the old woman. And she drew out the poisonous comb and held it up. The girl was so pleased with the pretty comb that she let herself be tempted and opened the door. After Snow White purchased the comb, the old woman, "Now I will comb your hair properly." Poor Snow White did not know she was in danger, and she let the old woman begin. But the comb had scarcely touched her hair before the powerful poison began to work, and Snow White fell down senseless. There, you paragon of beauty," said the wicked woman. "This is the end of you," and she quickly went away. Luckily, it was near evening, and the 7 dwarfs soon returned home. When they again found Snow White lying lifeless on the ground, they at once suspected her wicked stepmother. They searched and found the poisonous comb, and as soon as they removed it, Snow White came to herself and told them what had happened again. The dwarfs told her she must be careful and never open the door to anyone. When the queen reached home, she stood before the mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" The mirror answered, "Queen, thou art the fairest here I hold, but Snow White over the 7 hills, who with the 7 dwarfs now dwells, is fairer still 1,000-fold." When the queen heard the mirror's reply, she quivered with rage. "Snow White shall die," she cried, "even if it costs my own life." Then she went to the secret and lonely chamber where no one would find her, and there she made a deadly, poisonous apple. Ripe and rosy, it was so beautiful to look upon that anyone who saw it would long to eat it. But whoever might eat even a little bit of it was certain to die. When the apple was ready, the queen painted her face, disguised herself as a peasant woman, and again journeyed over the 7 hills to the house of the 7 dwarfs. When the old woman knocked at the door, Snow White put her head out of the window and said, "I cannot open the door to anybody. The 7 dwarfs have forbidden it." "Very well," replied the peasant woman. "I only want to be rid of my apples. Here, I will give you one of them." "No," said Snow White, "I cannot take it." "Are you afraid of being poisoned?" asked the old woman. "Look here, I will cut the apple in 2, and you can eat the rosy side, and I will eat the white." Now the fruit was so cleverly made that only the rosy side was poisoned. Snow White longed to bite into the pretty apple, and when she saw the peasant woman eat her half, she could resist no longer. But she stretched out her hand and took the poisonous half. No sooner had she tasted the fruit than she fell lifeless to the ground. The wicked queen, laughing loudly, glared at Snow White with a terrible look and cried, "Oh, you with skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony, the 7 dwarfs cannot bring you back to life this time." When the queen arrived home, she again asked the mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" The mirror at last answered, "Queen, thou art the fairest of them all." Then her jealous heart had so much peace as a jealous heart can ever know. When the dwarfs came home in the evening, they found Snow White lying breathless and motionless on the ground. They feared that indeed she was dead. They lifted her up, searched to see whether she had anything poisonous about her, loosened her dress ribbon, combed her hair, washed her with water, but all was in vain, for they could not bring the darling girl back to life. They laid her down, and all the 7 dwarfs sat themselves around her, and they wept and mourned for 3 long days. Then they would have buried her, but she still looked so fresh and alive, and had such lovely rosy cheeks. "We cannot lower her into the dark earth," they said. So they had a coffin of glass made for her, so that she could be seen from every side. They laid her in it, writing her name on the outside in letters of gold, telling that she was the daughter of a king. Then they placed the coffin on the mountainside above, and one of them always stayed by it and guarded it. But there was little need to guard it at all, for even the wild animals came and mourned for Snow White. The birds came too, first an owl, and then a raven, and at last a little dove. Snow White lay in her coffin unchanged for many long, long years. She looked always the same, as if she were asleep, for she still had skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony. Then one day, the son of the king wandered into the forest, and he came to the dwarf's house, looking for a night's shelter. He saw the coffin on the mountainside, the beautiful Snow White within it, and he read what was written there in letters of gold. Then he said to the dwarfs, "Let me have the coffin. I will give you whatever you ask for it." But the dwarfs answered, "We would not part with it for all the gold in the world. I beg you to give it to me, for I cannot live without seeing Snow White." and although she is dead, I will prize and honor her as my dearest treasure." Then the good dwarfs took pity on him and gave him the coffin, and the prince asked his servants to carry it away. As they were going along, they stumbled over a bush, and the shaking force the bit of poisonous apple out of Snow White's mouth. Immediately she opened her eyes, raised the coffin lid, and sat up, alive once more. "Oh, heaven!" she cried. "Where am I?" The prince answered joyfully, "You are with me," and he told her what had happened, saying, "I love you more dearly than anything else in the world. Come with me to my father's castle and be my wife." Snow White agreed and happily went with him, and their marriage was celebrated with great splendor. The wicked stepmother was also invited to the feast. When she had dressed herself in the most beautiful clothes, she stood before the mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" The mirror answered, "Queen, thou art the fairest here I hold, but the young queen over the mountains, old, is fairer still 1,000-fold." The evil-hearted woman uttered a curse and was beside herself with anger and disappointment. At first she thought she would not attend the wedding, but her curiosity would not allow her to rest. She decided to travel to the wedding to see the young queen, who the mirror had said was the most beautiful in the world. When the wicked queen got there and found Snow White alive again, she choked with her rage and fell down dead. Snow White and the prince lived happily ever after and often visited the 7 dwarfs who had been so kind to her. The end.